Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast. My name is Philip Frey and today I will be talking about the concept of duty to society. This is part of the core principles of relationships series, and previously in the series we have talked about how adult relationships are voluntary and how that applies to parents and their adult children. These are podcasts number 16 and 17. And today I will be taking the principle of adult relationships being voluntary and applying it to the question of duty to society. Does the idea hold up? And what kind of implications does this knowledge have on our relationships? The concept of duty to society is widespread. Expressions such as serving your country or giving back to society encapture this idea. It is the idea that you owe to be patriotic to your country, you owe to be a part of the military, or it is an honorable thing to be part of the military. A good citizen pays his taxes, a good businessman pays his taxes, and a great businessman, a morally noble businessman, should give back to society over and above the taxes he pays. It is the idea that because society has supported us and enabled our success, we owe to repay that favor. As I discussed in podcast number 16, Adult Relationships Are Voluntary, the moral logic behind these ideas is incorrect. Briefly, you have not chosen to enter any kind of contract with whoever claims to be the representative of society at any given time. It was not your choice to be born, nor was it your choice to be born in a world where most habitable land is controlled by groups who call themselves governments. I bring this up because often the argument is, well, you could move. If you don't like it, move to another country. But if you stay, that means you automatically agree. But when most habitable land in the world is part of a country and having any kind of contact with civilization is the price of not taking part of the social contract, that argument doesn't hold. It does hold with a homeowners association, for example. So should you choose to move into a certain neighborhood and when purchasing the property, you explicitly agree to obey certain rules, such as the appearance of your house or your lawn, or what kind of activities you're permitted to do in that neighborhood, that's a voluntary relationship. When you're born in a country, no such agreement ever takes place. And whatever public services society bestowed upon you, again, you have never entered any agreement to reciprocate, nor can you directly reciprocate, because most of it is funded by taxation from people who don't use the system. So paradoxically, the people paying the most taxes are the least likely to use such services as public health care, public education, policing, social security, or any kind of welfare system. But that's a tangent, because whether they do or don't do, you have never entered any kind of agreement. And in fact, many services you never chose to get at all, and you probably preferred at the time or even the later date to have never gotten. Did you want to attend public school? Did you want to fund foreign wars of aggression or rampant spying of the population? Those are things that not only you haven't agreed to pay for, but you actively do not want to pay for, but it doesn't matter. Because the concept of voluntarism is violated in these relationships. And even participating in voting is not a valid form of social contract, and we would absolutely recognize that in a different context. So people are very upset about Pepsi and Coca-Cola causing obesity. Well, imagine if instead of choosing to buy the products or not buy the products, or buy this product one day and the other day, you'd have the choice of voting between these two companies, and the one elected would basically have full control of your money with no limits on how much they're going to allocate from your money to your sugary beverage consumption. Also, they could dictate any aspect of your drinking habits, what you drink, where you drink it, how you drink it, and if you failed to comply, you would be locked up. And you could have only one at a time, and it would be a monopoly. It would be illegal for anybody else to produce soft drinks. And you'd get the drinks and have to drink them and pay for it, regardless of whether you have voted for any of the companies at all, or whether you voted for the other company. It wouldn't matter. And you couldn't exit this deal in any way individually. The only way you could exit would be to convince a very large number of people, get a new election organized, and even then, what you could do is switch to the other company. Those would be your options. People would recognize this as something that is fundamentally not voluntary, and that is a major violation of individual rights. Well, the government operates on the same logic, except having a broader control and interfering with everything rather than just soft drinks. And were it not for constant indoctrination and propaganda, this would be very clearly understood. I believe the logic of the question is very clear. Once somebody looks into it, it doesn't take a lot of logical contortions or really sophisticated models to get the idea that this is not voluntary and that the sense of duty is false. So why the haze? It is a number of things. Having ideas such as these will make you very unpopular in most circles. And when people are confronted between choosing things that are logical versus choosing things that are approved by their groups, they will often go with the group preference. And the other aspect is the amount of vicious and vile propaganda that children are subjected to. And this podcast is listened to in many countries, so I will tell you what I experienced and apply it to what you have experienced, if you see the parallels. So let me tell you about what was going on in my childhood. I attended a Hungarian school in Romania in Eastern Europe. Hungarians are a sizable minority in Romania, and you have certain areas that are almost exclusively Hungarian. So Hungarian history has two major events that are really looked up to. And these two events are two failed revolutions. One of them in 1848 against Austrian rule, and the other one in 1956 against Russian influence and communism. And these are major celebrations. And in my school, every year, entire weeks would be centered around these topics, year after year after year. And we would study it in history class, we would read poems about it, we would read stories about it, we would look at art related to it, and we would even produce art related to it. And this was a time of conflict and of battles in Hungarian history. And I distinctly remember that I was 7 or 8 years old, drawing scenes of battle and urban warfare and corpses and death and destruction at 7 or 8 years old. And then they would collect all of this from all the students, and it would go on the walls of the school, where they would be displayed for months or even until the next year. So you'd have kids of 6 years old walking around these hallways, being surrounded by gruesome depictions of death and destruction all the time. And every poem and story about this was a variation on the subject of the glory and nobleness of sacrificing it all, preferably your life, to your country. Let me give you a quote from a famous poem. It's a translation and it is often read at these occasions. "The thought torments me sore, lest I upon a pillowed couch should die, should slowly fade like the fair flower, whose heart the gnawing worms devour." So the poet says that he doesn't want to die of old age. That is terrible. And what does he want instead? I'm skipping ahead here. "When every nation wearing chains shall rise and seek the battle plains, with flushing face shall wave in fight, their banners blazoned in the light. For liberty their cry shall be, their cry from east to west, till tyrants be depressed. There shall I gladly yield my life upon the field, there shall my heart's last blood flow out, and I my latest cry shall shout. May it be drowned in clash of steel, in trumpets and cannons' peal, and over my corpse let tread the horse which gallops home from victory's gain, and leaves me trodden mid the slain." And I was probably around 10 or 11 when I recited this poem in public, and I still mostly remember it by heart. Now, this poet actually achieved what he was looking for, and though it's unsure, he probably died in one of the last battles of this revolution in 1849. And he is now a national hero, and the school where I went was actually named after him, and every year brats would be placed at his statue and there would be this big celebration of him. And throughout the school years we'd read poems on how the country is above all and sacrifice for it is the greatest good. And this was the environment that surrounded us as children. For a long time I didn't see it, but now that I look back to it, I see how gruesome and how vicious and how destructive and how mentally unhealthy these messages were, and how they were conditioning us to die for some political leaders' gains. And nobody raised a voice against this in that environment. In fact, I doubt that anyone saw just how ugly and vicious this whole procession is, and how inappropriate it is to subject small children to this. And even the most progressive and liberal teachers would gladly join in on this. And this happens in all countries of the world, because this creates the soldiers and the taxpayers needed to maintain the state. And I'm sure you had, to some extent, a similar experience. There's also a lot of propaganda in movies about duty to society. You have the classic kids fighting for the community center and the evil capitalist who wants to tear it down to build an IKEA or something. And then you have Mother's Day, Father's Day, a whole slew of literature on the value of family, the value of forgiveness, the value of blood above that of order. You have the commandment in the 10 Commandments to honor your mother and your father. And this is not society, this is the family, but it's the same idea, only on a smaller scale. And in the Bible you have the parable of the lost son, which on the surface is a very positive story, but basically the message is that family should be forgiven no matter what, and also that family members should be treated the same regardless of their behavior. If you remember the story, it concerns two brothers, and one of them can't wait for his father to die to get his part of the inheritance, so he convinces his father to give it to him, and he takes it and basically parties all the way and spends all the money in a rapid pace, and then when he is broke, he returns to the family where the father forgives him and holds a feast for him. And then the other brother, the older brother, if I remember correctly, raises concerns. He says, "Look, I've been working on your lands for all this time, and I've been serving you, and I've been increasing the family wealth, whereas my brother has just wasted his half of the share. So how is it fair that you hold a feast for him, yet you will not hold a smaller feast for me and my friends?" And the father essentially dismisses the complaint. What he says is that the older son's work will fundamentally return to him, given that it is fully his estate now, the other brother having taken his half, so he's fundamentally been working for himself, and then proceeds to contradict it by saying that they should celebrate the return of the younger son because he was lost and now he is found. And if you don't see it, let me point out the contradiction. The feast is being hosted, if the logic holds, from the older son's wealth without his consent. And these kinds of messages about duty to society, to family, to the groups that we belong to, that we didn't choose to belong to, are omnipresent. And I believe that now that you've raised your attention to it, if you haven't been paying attention to it before, it will stand out to you and you will see it all the time. Is it any wonder that the logic gets distorted and people's relationships suffer because they are bound by duty and by honor instead of assessing all relationships with the same standards? Is it any wonder that they get defensive on this subject? How much damage had been done to their ability to be a good judge? Pointing that out is painful. So does that mean that you own nothing to society? Yes. Does it mean that you shouldn't engage in charity or fight if need be to defend your community or obey social standards you never agreed to? No. All of it is fundamentally your choice. But if you feel that duty and obligation to do things you've never agreed to do in the first place, things that entail sacrifice, giving up a greater value for a lesser one or a non-value, you should carefully look into your motivations behind that. You should carefully look into who in your life is being subsidized, who can get away with adding less value or no value or negative value and having less virtues, no virtues or vices because of these beliefs, because of this false sense of duty. Give to charities where the money is not a sacrifice, but an investment into something that has an impact that matters to you. Help people not out of pity, but because you want good to succeed in this world. I personally give a percentage of my income to people producing content that I like. I don't do it because I feel an obligation to do it, or because I pity them for their failure to get more income. I do it because I want the good and the good people, the people who share and live my values and virtues, to succeed in this world. And I love the impact that they have on the world, and thus they're making it a better place for me. I would never fight in a foreign war of aggression because I know that it is immoral, illogical, and if I would feel any kind of a sense of duty in me, I'd be very skeptical and I would do my best to analyze its roots. I prefer to pay as little in taxes as I can, and though I can't avoid it, I try to minimize it without putting myself into risk. And I try not to participate in public services when I can avoid it, but I have no moral boundaries using the roads to walk to places or using the National Health Service here in the United Kingdom, which is public healthcare, when private service has been pushed out of existence or made unnecessarily expensive by endless regulation. I actively monitor my relationships with people, and I am very careful to make sure that they don't stem out of familial obligation or a sense of duty or a sense of pity. Those influences run deep in me, like they do in anybody else. You can't really fully escape it, and the damage has been done for years and years on end. But with mindfulness, that is something that can be counteracted. To sum up, as with all relationships, in your relationship with groups and society and family, you must bear the same principle in mind. All adult relationships ought to be voluntary, and the ones stemming from a sense of duty and obligation are to be looked upon with a critical eye, especially when no agreement was given by you. Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth podcast, and I dare you to flourish today. If you have friends who you know would enjoy the content being produced here, please share it with them. At this stage, growth is the focus of Valiant Growth appropriately. What I mean by that is reaching greater impact is what I'm trying to do. So that is the best way to help out the show. Thank you.